is our panel discussion. So for that, I would like to introduce the panel, and the panel is also welcome to turn on their videos should they so want. And the panel is composed of, I'll take them in the order that they put on their videos. So one member of the panel is Professor Susanne Ditlevsen from the Department of Mathematics at University of Copenhagen. Member 2 of the panel is Francesco Samino, professor at the SDU and a theoretical physicist. And the last member of the panel, the face that might be least recognizable to this very particular audience, is Sonja Fogel, who is a reporter at Weekendavisen, writing mostly for Idéer, former at Politiken. Full disclosure, then Sonja contacted me about some specific questions, and I felt that she had an interesting curiosity about her approach to science, while still, of course, being at the consumer side of our advice. So I am looking much forward to this discussion. I am an optimistic person. I think the end game is coming. The end game for this disease is actually getting closer. But that also means that there's the whole vaccine question. That would be something all of us would probably have some sort of professional or personal opinion on. I think objective truths are becoming more fiercely fought. We are maybe a little bit less in a survival mode, and as we see, the fights might actually get more bitter now. And the tiredness and the acceptance of these restrictions is becoming more of an issue than it was, and it will probably become even more so. Somehow, if you do a very long trip, it's always towards the very last end that you end up fighting with the kids. So I would therefore, and also in light of what was up during all the talks, start with you, Sonja. How have you and your colleagues, have you felt that you got what you needed from us? Did you feel that we were communicating in a way that was interpretable, usable? How could we have done better? Sort of starting a little bit from there.
I think it's very hard to give like one answer to that question, but I could come up with several ones. First of all, I think it has been very easy to get in contact with experts, and I think that people have been very willing to talk, which has been very positive as a journalist, that you can just call people and they're willing to talk to you and pick up the phone at several times a day. But also I think it has been a bit hard, and I also talked to my colleagues about this, and it's also been a story in the media, that it seems like regarding the Serum Institute, it has been really hard to like get in touch with the experts there, and it has been a bit difficult with the data, that we feel like that maybe only like several experts has been like having the access to like this data, and it's been a bit hard to like see through as a journalist like what is up and down in this, and maybe it could yeah, it's just been a bit hard sometimes to see if they were really like on their own. But yeah, so I think what I'm missing is more see-through, like in the data and like in what you're doing as experts, that yeah, more see-through in that, if that makes sense.
So is that a matter of who are we representing, or is it more like what are we doing? How could we have done it better?
Yeah, I think maybe put it all more out, more clear. Like also like we talked a bit about like the data. It could normally, because like when you're a science journalist, it's really hard for me to see through and be critical because I don't know the subjects as you do. And then often I would have like different experts to look at the data, and that could be nice that if the data is out, like as we saw with the mink mutation case, a couple of weeks ago. The data wasn't out and we were supposed to write about it, which was really hard for me. I did a small article in Veganavisen about it, but I couldn't really, like, I tried to call other experts, not from the Serum Institute, but I couldn't get any other views on it because they didn't have access to the data. So that was a problem.
That's maybe a good link into the other two members of the panel, because this thing about, and I guess when I hear you, it's also this, if you want to write a story, you need more than one source.
Exactly, because it's really hard for me to be critical, because I will never know the subjects as you do. So that's why I need different opinions.
And I think that could link into both Susanna and Francesco, what you have been saying publicly, that were this process involving all experts and all people enough? Were we really getting the best out of everybody? Susanna, you want to go first?
That's I don't know if you got everything out of it. I mean, I've been contacted quite a lot from different journalists during this time, and I have felt compelled to do my best to answer many of the things I did not know on beforehand, and given some time to look at it and discuss it. But whether we have done what we should, I don't know. I think communication of statistics is, I have to take these off. I hear myself in an awful way. I just take these off. So communicating statistics to a general audience is very difficult. And I think we as a statistical community have to teach ourselves what to do and how to say, how to communicate. And I think also that we do have a job, especially in these times with the COVID-19, we have an excellent opportunity because there is a raised awareness in the general population about the importance of understanding numbers, the importance of understanding data, understanding analysis. And I think we are in a unique point in time where it's possible to get maybe an increased literacy in the population because people are actually willing to learn. But I think there we, as statisticians, also have an extra job to do, because as statisticians, we are very aware, for example, of uncertainty. And I think Uffe had some very good points on his R estimation. That you both look backwards in time, you change your estimates, etc. And I think that we should not be so scared to tell about the uncertainty. And I think the population, the audience, the journalists can actually manage. I have talked with quite a lot of journalists, and I've actually been in these last half year, and I've actually been quite surprised how well you understand uncertainty. So I think as statisticians, we often think that we cannot communicate this. But now I had prepared some questions also for some of the speakers, but I don't know if that is the time. But am I allowed to share my screen for a second, because it's a little related to this? Okay, let's see if I can manage this one. Can you see it?
Perfect.
Yes, you see. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
So this is from I stole this slide. And I even put David Spiegelhalter up in the window because I stole it from a talk he gave the other day online. David Spiegelhalter is a professor in communication of uncertainty at Cambridge University. And he had this slide about estimates. It's all from UK on estimates of R. I don't know if it was R0 or RT at a certain point or whatever. And this is an estimate of R from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different groups. Okay, so they are basically taking the same data, they're all having access to the same data, and they're all very good at communicating the uncertainty, and they're giving a nice kind of confidence interval. And the reason why they are so different is because different methods are being used, and I'm sure that all of the groups have probably done an excellent job in doing it. But the way we construct confidence intervals are obviously not capturing well the uncertainty, because of course all of these cannot be right. They're not even overlapping these confidence intervals. So how should we relate to the facts that the methods that we use are so, the results that we get out are so dependent? So this has to do with the uncertainty. So maybe I should stop sharing now.
Wouldn't that sort of be a question to Uffe? And as I see it, it is because maybe it's
I cannot hear you, Thijs.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I think
I can hear you.
Yeah, well, that maybe the uncertainties when they are recorded as confidence intervals are essentially the sampling uncertainty, whilst the uncertainty David is talking about in some sense is more the model uncertainty. That and that's actually, I mean, there was a question in the chat who was about, should we just all be more Bayesian? Uffe, we had this discussion essentially in public about two ways of computing and are not.
Yeah, well, I think I totally love that slide that Susanne just showed. I think it really points, well, you just said it, but the point here that what we are reporting are confidence intervals that are all conditional on the model structure. And there are enormous difference in these model assumptions. For example, let's be specific, how you compute most models that compute the reproductive number. They do that by first they compute a growth rate, and then they convert the growth rate to a reproductive number. And that conversion is typically, from what I've seen, that conversion is very uncertain and typically not included in the confidence intervals. You know, whether you assume an SRR type model or whether you assume exponential relationship between the small r and the capital R, and that uncertainty is typically not progressed. So I think this is a beautiful slide that Susanne showed, but also the fact is that if we include all the uncertainty in these confidence intervals, including the model, then the uncertainty in the model structure, then we get some very large confidence intervals, which also in some sense are misleading, because what we typically are after is also trends in reproductive numbers that can be estimated more confidently. So I think super difficult and relevant question. I would like, now I have the word, I would like to follow up a little bit on this issue of data openness and availability, because that was something we were really struggling with and are still struggling with in the expert group. This year, that much of this data that we are basing these models on is confidential. And part of it is due to the GDRP regulations. We can't share this data. It links to CPR numbers and whatnot. And in some cases, the counts are too small, etc. And that was I don't know what I don't know how to solve this, but it is really a dilemma that the data that lies beneath the analysis, we simply can't share that. I don't know how we go about that. It is a huge problem. The next problem is then, could we be open about the algorithms and the model structures? And there, I think, in honesty, in the expert group, we could have been much more open. And I think our problem, so to speak, was not wish to be to conceal stuff, but rather an immense workload. That meant that this part about as soon as you supply an answer to the, as soon as we write a report and supply an answer to the SSI, then the next question comes in. And that means that the effort to actually document and publish and push out, that time wasn't there. I was super, we just heard our previous speaker here, the number of preprints that he pushed. I can say in this period that I worked in this expert group, I have submitted 0 preprints simply due to lack of time. I mean, I have probably 10 drafts sitting in my folders of things that should have been published and documented, but there was always some other more urgent measure. And I think that's a problem that, because the end result is that these, for instance, my model that estimates reproductive numbers, that has not been published. And I think that's I'm embarrassed, that's annoying, but there have been other priorities.
Yeah.
Maybe I can also add something. Can you hear me?
Yes, Francisco, please go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate all the work done, because I can imagine the pressure that there was in these months. And but I also had very pleasant, actually, interactions with Danish press, and actually with the world press, because I've been particularly in the press, I would say technically in every single country in the world. So, and my impression was that the journalists were extremely cautious and extremely precise. So I was positively impressed about the level of knowledge and the level of seriousness. And Italian journalists, French journalists, Swiss journalists, Swiss radio, Danish journalists. I have met, I have to say, I don't have the impression that journalists were superficial at all. On the very contrary, they were extremely responsible. So I should actually, to my actually own kind of surprise, the level of knowledge was very deep. And of course, if you address them also professionally too, I mean, you don't have to say anything that you're not able to say, you're not able to confront. I was often confronted by the Danish journalists. What do I think about the SSI? What about think about the expert group? Why I was not in the expert group? How this is done, how that is actually constructed, is still a mystery to me. But I mean, there could probably be some very good, reasonable algorithms for this, for why this works. And I have absolutely immense respect. That should be very clear. I'm not criticizing anyone in particular. I'm just trying to understand how this is set up. But being in Italian in Denmark, I always felt that there is already predefined kind of network that actually works probably beforehand. But nevertheless, I respect very much what has happened. I was actually lacking, and I said very honestly to the journalists, I don't know what algorithms have been used to do this analysis. I suspect is the old-fashioned SIR model, which is probably indeed what happened from what I understand, which is pretty dated as a model. I mean, it's used a lot, but effectively it's extremely dated. But I mean, for some basic predictions, it was actually okay. So I would say that from my point of view, and also my colleagues' point of view, and we come from a different, completely different point of view. I'm a theoretical physicist who works on fundamental interactions, and I started working in this because of curiosity-driven research. We did not get any fundings whatsoever. So it's basically whatever we have done is basically out of our own curiosity. Not actually, there was no mandate nor anyone actually supporting our research at all. So in this particular area, but we could use the methodology exported by our own, in our own field. That has been quite interesting to use and so from our point of view, it's been a huge return scientifically. So that is interesting. But I would have appreciated personally a little bit more interaction, whether they're possible, and if we could have helped, we would have been extremely. By we means me, I was the only one, and one of my colleagues at the university here, and then other colleagues now in different parts of the world. we would have been very happy to support and actually provide extra means to even compare the data, because also to reply to Susanne, it's true that there are different estimates of this R of t. So you have to be careful. If you use a specific model, you're going to get eventually within that model a certain prediction of that, because there are, even within the SIR, there are infinite variation of SIR models, right? So one has to actually look at that in an extremely careful way, because SIR is not an exact modeling, it's just an approximate modeling. So it does not incorporate all the symmetries of the problem either. So one has to be very careful about the interpretation of the SIR. Hope this helps actually explain a little bit.
We have two eager comments. The first is from Sam and then Susanne. So Sam, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you know, it's that slide from David Spiegelhalter has made its rounds, but in many ways it is misleading, because it gives the impression that there were 6 different models without overlapping uncertainty, that all these models were using the same data and the same data generating process. And most crucially, it doesn't include the context of when those models were released for. Those models were released at the time when the UK was at an inflection point. For any growing process, understanding when that inflection point is going to be going up or below the reproduction number 1 line is, of course, a very, very difficult decision. What those SPI-M consensus models do, some are Bayesian, some are SIR, some are deterministic. It's expected. They have different data generating mechanisms, different data, they'll have different uncertainty intervals. What they do is form a clear consensus that the reproduction number is not below 1, and that it's above 1. It's also misleading in the sense that it's not cognizant of the context about when those estimates were made and why they're like that. It's assuming that it's always like that. This was a particularly uncertain time for when that's taken. But it's also that the decision to then take policy from SPI-M goes up the ladder to SAGE, which then goes to the chief scientific officer. And it isn't just the reproduction number that gets sent out from different groups, right? There are projection slides, probably 40 of those similar, which then look at hospitalizations, look at deaths, look at infection rates, look at scenarios projecting forwards, from which a consensus statement is made. So I think, you know, just sort of looking at the models and expecting them all to overlap from disparate modeling groups using different frameworks with different data generating mechanisms is sort of, it's focusing on the wrong aspect of what's wrong with these models and what can be improved, and lacks the nuance required to explain how the decision makings get made in these issues.
Just adding a little bit of that, I second that view, and it's also been some of the experience here that we see a clash of culture between how the government is making decisions, which many of us do not know because we haven't really been confronted with it before, but that doesn't go along a public scientific publication strategy, but it has a lot of steps and a lot of dialogue, and it goes on completely different to what we are used to. And I think some of these clashes you see here is a reflection of that, both that they don't understand us and we don't understand them. Susanne?
Yes, so thank you, Samir, for the answer, point taken. And I know it was a little provocative. And of course, things that are, especially things that are changing with time. In fact, Uffe gave kind of an answer already in his slides about estimating RT at the same point, but from different modeling viewpoints. So, but I still think it is related. I mean, as statisticians, we might understand these things, but related to the communication. But I would like, there's a question I would really like to give to the speakers, because especially the last 3 speakers, now Anton left, unfortunately, but there's this, it's related to the problems of estimating key quantities. So there's so many things that are unknown in the COVID-19, and more gets known, but there's a lot of unknowns. And as statisticians or epidemiologists or whatever, you're standing with this problem of having observational data that are actually collected for a different purpose, because I think that most of the data is collected in order to combat the disease. So in order to know more, there's testing, there is following, etc., of people trying to track down the people before they start infecting. That means that the data is observational in a sense that is not good for statistics. So now my question is, in Denmark we have a very, very, we test a lot. We test around 60 to 70,000 a day. And as far as I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's one of the countries that test the most. And the policy is that everyone can go down and be tested if they want to. And that is kind of the policy it has been since we scaled up the testing. So my question is to you, is this the optimal way of using such huge amount of resources from the Danish authorities? So say we have 70,000 tests or 75,000 tests a day to do. Is this the best way to do it? And how does that relate to actually, so collecting data to combat the disease or collect data to gain information about the disease? Of course, because the tests are not randomized. So could we actually be a little more proactive as statistician towards the authorities to ask them maybe to collect data in another way? And how should that be? What would be the, if it was not observational data, but we could actually select the type of data that would be collected, what should it be?
So a quick answer from our two model experts. Samir, Uffe, who want to go first? And keep it short.
I'll go first. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree that the epidemiological data, especially for infectious diseases, is almost always reactive in terms of cases, and statistical tools such as post-stratification and better demographic and locational breakdowns can essentially make this testing data hugely important. However, it is no substitute for gold standard population cross-sectional surveys. So in the UK, we have two such surveys, the REACT survey and the Office of the National Statistics survey. And so every single week or bi-week, we get an estimate of the population level prevalence, the reproduction number from these surveys. These surveys are, of course, randomized and to some degree stratified. And so they provide you an independent, unbiased sort of view of what's happening in transmission. Now, these then can be used as inputs within models, also can be used to calibrate models. So, for example, in the plots that you showed, those R estimates would have been put upon right next to REACT2 and ONS to actually see where we land on those. So it should be one of those things where every government does a survey. It's just that these cross-sectional household surveys cost so much money. And ultimately, if you're looking for a metric like prevalence, the lower your infection rates are, the higher the detection threshold is required to actually, binomially, to calculate, to get the number of samples. And so, yeah, I completely think that these surveys are an integral part of the public health response, but you get a lot of information from the testing data as well. For example, we would have known in the UK, all of us knew in the UK, that the cases were rising every, I think, 2 or 3 weeks from August, right? Our local authority platform and our modeling platform was saying this consistent message throughout. You didn't need any more sophisticated methods to know that this was happening, and that there was a degree of exceptionalism that maybe nothing bad would happen.
Uffe, then Francisco.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Well, we did discuss in the expert group at some point, we did discuss if we should send out the question regarding experimental design, statistical design of experiments for this testing capacity. And as far as, maybe Thijs, you remember better than I do, but as far as I remember, we didn't really push it that far. It seems that it seems that my impression is that we are always one step behind. It always seems that then there is a new phenomenon that appears and sets the agenda that nobody has thought of, and that means that a careful statistical analysis of optimal design of experiments will always prepare for the last war, so to speak. It will be the generals that prepare for the last war. And what I mean is that then suddenly it is minks in mink farms in northern Jutland or the west coast. How would we, let's just try to turn the clock back, and let's say that we had sent out the question to statistical design of experiments in July or August. Would anybody have come up with this? We need to focus on mink farms. I don't think we would have seen that coming at that point. Maybe somebody would, but I certainly wouldn't before it broke the news. And similarly, these questions about stratification, it seems that we are always we're learning new features about how the disease spreads in different subgroups in the society, whether it's socioeconomic or it's ethnic or it's age structured or population density, whatever. And once we get an idea about this, then we are ready to design the experiments. But at that point, it's already too late. I'm not saying it's that doesn't say that it would be impossible. Just say that I see difficulty in actually doing this in practice ahead of time. In terms of resources, what I really think if we should say where should we allocate resources, then based on my personal anecdote here, I would say it's the contact tracing that is the key. And I think we've also seen that that point of view advocated in the media over the last period here. That the Denmark, although we are testing not like crazy, it's a good thing, we're testing a lot, but we're not super efficient in doing the contact tracing. And I think the whole system, I have a personal experience there because, I got a message that I was a close contact. And then after that, I developed symptoms and had to go through the system. And I could tell how that whole contact tracing system is just overwhelmed at this point. And in particular, the principle that we have right now that you don't qualify, you don't start this procedure until you actually have a positive test result. And I think that actually puts in a delay in the system that really reduces the effectivity of the contact tracing. Again, my personal experience was that I know now that it was Tuesday afternoon that I was a super spreader. Tuesday evening, Monday morning, I developed the symptoms. Thursday evening, I had Friday, I had a positive test response. And at that point, the contact tracing, the official contact tracing began. And that was way too late because at this point, it shouldn't be focusing on my contacts. I had already been isolating for several days at that point in time. It should be focusing on the people that I've been in contact with, so next generation. So that system there, if there is any place where we should ramp up the capacity, then in my view, it would be on rapid contact tracing, realizing that people pass on the disease before they develop symptoms and before they test positive.
So, I saw you and I will pass the word on to you, but just one comment on how we can have an impact. That is also to realize what is politically at all on the table. So for instance, trying to decide on the overall strategy decisions for AG testing, it's not even worth the breath because that thing is so political that you won't get there. personal view, personal experience. If you then, instead, as Uffe suggests, maybe focus on something which is a little bit less dangerous, but have a very clear message. If we could provide all our different methods and angles to say how much would be gained by doing something along those lines, I think that would have an impact. But you're not changing that the mink moved our testing capacity to Northern Jutland. Francesco, you marked?
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, there are several, like going back to the question by Susanne, first of all, there are several points of view. I mean, first of all, what do you want to use the data for? Because there is timing, right? So if you want to actually, right now, we're going to put a paper out for the third wave pandemic in Europe. Because if you're interested in timing, then actually a much more homogeneous testing rather than intensive testing is actually sufficient. You don't need to do billions of tests if you actually want to study the wave pandemics rather than interested in how many are actually going to get infected, which of course is relevant, but you can start predicting from previous waves. So timing does not require an intensive testing, it requires actually homogeneous testing of the population. So where something you can rely on. Now, this is one thing that's interesting. The other thing that I also question for the expert panel, since the second wave was actually very much anticipated, and many people were already discussing that, including us, I found that acting when you are in an exponential phase is too late. You should be acting actually before the exponential phase in preventing the second wave, not actually when the second wave starts. That's what happened basically in every single country in Europe. Acting after the second wave has started. There's been a disaster, for example, in France, there's also in Italy. So I understand the political reason of not taking measures while you are in the strolling regime, when there is actually not much seems to be happening. But during that period, the disease spreads geographically before starting again. Now, for example, in Italy, it starts all over the country, not only in the specific regions, right? The same has happened in Denmark. So this is actually a percolation process in physics. In physics, we understand really well how timing works, how the normalization group works, and that's something that can be used very much to understand the dynamics of multiple waves, which actually is something that's still underway right now. So there's a number of things that one can do. One can actually even conceive and predict with a certain clear degree of confidence level, so you are not going to be so precise, but precise enough to have an idea of when that's going to start. So depending on the region, of course, if you're interested in what happens in Mink or in a very specific region, in what happens if you open a school, this is something that you cannot do. But on average and over several million individuals, so like over 3 million individuals, actually have reasonably general behaviors. Right? This also goes to what Samir was saying. I can actually have also questions for him and also perhaps suggestions on what does it mean lockdown. You have to look, for example, to Google and Apple data and actually have a well-defined definition of lockdown, which is not only when the government tells you that, because in fact, even Sweden has a certain degree of lockdown, because there's a social distancing the humans themselves impose on themselves, because as you correctly say, they're getting scared what happens. So there are, depending on the question you actually want to address, there are different ways to addressing that. So for the testing, if I would be interested in timing, when the third wave comes, can we actually avoid it? Can we actually postpone it?
I will cut you off there and then try to it over, because essentially what you're saying is that we need to be more active, that we should go and, for instance, we should have alarmed the public and the politicians about this approaching second wave. And I agree, many of us knew or guessed that that would come. It wasn't that magic. So Sonja, do you think the public knew? Were you writing the right papers? Were we getting there? And is it at all possible to cry wolf because you fear the wolf, or do you actually have to wait until the wolf is there?
Actually, I wrote about this in the beginning of the pandemic. I wrote about that Kormelbach said that there wouldn't be a second wave. And then I spoke to different experts in other countries, and they all said that there would be a second wave. And I think that there was a lot of talk in the media about this second wave, but I think it came earlier, probably also maybe earlier than you thought. But I don't think it was communicated straight out. I didn't get a call from any expert saying, do you want to write about this second wave? And that's also something I've thought about when we have all this discussion, like, do you ever go like to a journalist if you have something new or interesting to tell? I feel like it seems like you're so busy that you don't even have time to do like a preprint, which I understand, but
that I have to correct you, Sonia. Sorry, this was actually written about already in August 5th, when the paper came out. This actually journalists already wrote down that already from beginning of August that there will be a second wave in the fall in Europe and even in Denmark. So that actually was already on Berlinske.
I think my question was not, was it written anywhere? Because it was.
Right.
The question was there a general perception of it?
I don't think, and that's my perspective, I don't think it was communicated clear, but maybe it's because people didn't really know. But if you have like data that showed that there would be a second wave, I think it could have been more clear out communicated.
I mean, it's kind of weird, this situation, because with regard to the second wave, there's just it's based on two facts, right? Which is the proportion of the population that had been infected up to a time. Serological studies told us this was very low across all of Europe, and that the disease is still highly transmissible with possible airborne and written routes. I think there has been a lot of disinformation regarding the case-demic. I mean, we at Imperial, we get this in droves, and we don't know how to combat it at all. I mean, I'm writing a paper now that's looking at the media landscape of COVID. Honestly, 50% of articles in May were about coronavirus. You can't communicate any meaningful information to anybody when 50% of all articles are on coronavirus, because everything is to do with coronavirus. It's like a background news at that point. And it's still around 25%. But my point is that there is, and this is not, I think the media have done a great job in correcting this, but there has been so much misinformation regarding herd immunity, regarding the case-demic, that cases are because of testing, regarding PCR positivity, that during the period where the cases were rising up and the second wave was clearly happening everywhere, there was just so much disinformation to the contrary. I have no idea how any scientific paper can correct that error. Maybe,
no,
maybe
but yeah, but I mean, sorry, in this sense, that's where the expert group works, right? I mean, I understand there must be miscommunication at the media, that I understand, but that's when the expert group. So how does it work there? So this is my ignorance. So if you knew that there was a second wave, did you communicate it to the government and tell them what to do in August?
Yeah.
Or it's just because I don't know how it works. So
this is how it worked, at least for us, is that we built a platform based on our modeling framework. We knew that cases were rising. Other groups were saying cases were rising. We knew the reproduction rate was rising. We knew that the UK had testing difficulties. We made statements about this to that fact. This goes up the scientific ladder. But ultimately, there is this disconnect, and this is a personal opinion, a disconnect that scientists should be the ones giving policy. You know, policy makers, it's their job to give policy, right? We can give evidence the best we can. Ultimately, the job of a policymaker has to be to make the decision. They can't give that buck to somebody else. And I think scientists have raised the alarm, you know, perpetually. The Danish situation is a bit different because the wave came so suddenly and so fast. But
no, the first wave, I
would just, Sonia, you get the word in a sec. I'll just highlight what Lasse just wrote in the Q&A, namely that the second wave was in our report back in May, and then second Sam, that the expert group, when advising the government, is that you provide as best as you can answers to questions posed, and policy decisions are left for politicians. We are not elected. We should not try to take that role. That's not how our system works. So Sonia, please.
Yes, I was just curious. Did you tell the government that there was coming this second wave, and did you knew that it was coming so early? Because
yes, we knew actually. Yeah, we knew it was actually written. Yeah, it was in a paper that was actually also then upgraded by Nature Research on the 23rd of September, a published paper It was made the world news. They've been reported in all the journals, including
Well, this is the scientific report one.
But then we was coming
yeah,
in.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you made the
Yes,
news
yes,
every
yes, 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 yes. Yes, and absolutely. No. That was actually, and it was already out as a preprint since August. So then it was upgraded by Nature Research to be a world news. The Nature Research made the world news later until the 3rd of September. So, but the paper was publicly available from the 5th of August, where we already shown that, as also Samir was saying, that there were already many European countries where Danes were still going actually to Spain, to Greece, to Croatia for as tourists, and they were actually already going deep in a second wave. So there was no doubt that they would take them back, and that Europe will undergo that. So I don't think it's, I mean, we could have been, I mean, again, with all the estimates, things like that, we could have made a mistake of a couple of weeks, but not several months. And then that, indeed, that's what happened. So it really hurts to see now Italy, for example, or France, but also Denmark. I mean, there is a responsibility when people die. So there is actually a responsibility. It's not something that you can say that, well, we were wrong. No, that's not something you can accept. And if there were a certain degree of measures, you don't reopen the schools like they did, right? I mean, that's where you think this actually, it would certainly not stop, right? So now, again, that's why I asked, because since I don't know how the people which were closer to the governments were actually advising the governments, but I doubted that, you know, Macron or Conte or Mette Frederiksen, actually, they know all the details of that, or they actually read papers on Scientific Report or Nature. So I doubt they do that, and it's not their job. But on the other hand, we certainly believe that France and Italy, but even Denmark, could have certainly acted much earlier, since they had this news from August and then published paper in September. These are not something you can necessarily neglect. Or in any case, we'd like to understand.
From a scientific point of view, from us as a field, Susanne, do you have any sort of thoughts on where should we be as statisticians? How could we have done anything? I actually doubt it, but should we have done more?
So a very difficult question. I mean, in a certain sense, the government knew there would be a second wave. They talked about it. They were just waiting for the second wave, so they knew it. And whether they should have done something before, I mean, it seems like with the mix they should have, that they knew earlier but did not want to touch it. But apart from that, that seems to be a big mistake. I don't know. And in a certain sense, apart from the mink, we are not doing that bad in Denmark if you compare to other countries. So, but we don't know how it will be in 1 month, because I also have the feeling that there's so much randomness in this also. So there's big difference in how different countries are doing, and it's not completely correlated with the measures that are taken within the countries. So there's a randomness I think we still do not understand. Or we might understand.
I should.
Random, we cannot predict everything.
Yeah, I think some of the, it's not, maybe not random events, but it's something about feedback and culture that's not being adequately addressed. But also you had a virtual hand.
Regarding this here, when did the system in Denmark recognize that a second wave was coming? As I think Samir just said here, I think everybody knew that there was a potential for a second wave. I mean, why would there not be a second wave? The disease was as infectious as it's always been, and we were nowhere near herd immunity. So I think everybody knew that the potential was there. But the question is timing. When does it come? And I think if you look at what happened in Denmark, if I can just share the screen here, so what I have here are the number of positive tests. And what we saw was, as as I said in my presentation, there was in this phase here, there was some misunderstanding in the political system and in the public, because the number of positive tests soared, and everybody said, well, okay, second wave is coming. And this happened in August. And now, and that's why the system, for instance, masks were made mandatory in public transport in August. I don't remember the exact date, but in the second half of August, masks were made mandatory because of this bump here, which at that point was identified as a second wave. And I believe now at this point that was premature. This was actually not a second wave, because this was an artifact of ramping up the testing capacity. If we look at the testing capacity, we see that there was this dramatic increase in testing capacity in exactly that period. And maybe it was the luck of Denmark that the testing capacity ramped up exactly at the early onset of the second wave. So that meant that the political system was actually more aware of the wave than if you look at the signal in the daily hospitalizations, where the second wave didn't appear until at this point here in September. So I think actually in the public debate and the political system, as quantified by the intervention by the government there, that there was awareness of this second wave at an earlier point, where I, as a statistician, would say, nah, this is not really a second wave, it's just an increase in testing capacity.
No, but I mean, sorry, the second wave also happens because of the interaction with the other countries, not only because of what happens in Denmark. I mean, what actually led to the increase is when there were tourists going back and forth from Spain, Greece, and other countries in Europe that were still open. The things, that's because in Greece and Spain, the second wave had already started. So you can actually estimate the number of travelers going from these countries, basically. And you can actually, that is what had added to the actually already current situation in Denmark. So there are two contributions to that. One is the number of infection that in the strolling period geographically spreads within the country. The other one is the interaction with the other countries, which have already started their infection disease exponential growth. And that's when you actually have this effect that then propagates later in the countries. Basically, that's what happens, right? You cannot just look within the country itself. You have to also look at the interaction with the other countries which are having an infection growth, which is exponential. And that in August already started in all the countries where there was tourism, actually.
I'm not super convinced of that, but let's not go into that discussion here.
No.
Sonia, you, Mark, and then we are probably approaching the end.
I just have one question. You talked about a lot about this uncertainty that makes it hard for you to communicate the data, but how close were your projections, like the data, like your data of the second wave? How precise was that? Can you say something about that? Was it, or did you also have a big uncertainty in your?
I mean, if you want, I can share the screen so you can see by your own eyes. If I can do that, I need to.
Just for the audience, we are stopping in 3 minutes, but this is interesting. So let's just end this.
So
how good could we have been?
How do I share the screen? I just need to remember this. Share screen. Okay. Here it goes. Here it goes. Here it goes. Yeah. Here we go. Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can see the red curve is actually the infected cases in Denmark. And the blue curve is our prediction.
Okay, so it's worse.
So this, yeah, it's not too bad, I would say. That was in France, that's Finland. And you could say that the countries that did better are the ones which had a stronger policy for, traveling and so that was our predictions. And,
okay, and your uncertainty, where's that? I mean, it's is that
Uncertainty, because in order to guess, in order to estimate the second wave, we have assumed for the second wave an infection rate that oscillated, that was within 10% of the first infection rate, to have a kind of an estimate. So you could say that the second rate had a reasonable, yeah.
And what is
the challenge is to try to communicate that, including, of course, not only the Danish picture, but also the Finland and so on. However much I would love
There's also Italy.
This discussion moving forward, I have to end it now before we lose all our audience.
Can I have one last?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
That has to be
Sure.
very short, Anja. Very, 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 very short. Otherwise, you can ask afterwards if it's for a specific.
Yeah, maybe. I was just wondering
You can also call.
how it looks for the future. Like the couple of months, it looks like it was going down again a bit. Is that also?
So we're going to put a paper out to the next 2 days about understanding the wave pandemics also for the, yeah. So I'll send it to you when it's out. Yes, don't worry.
Okay.
If you can send, yeah.
I would like to finish off by thanking all of you. I was in doubt how this whole panel discussion would end or which direction we would take. I was informed, I hope you were too. And also thanks to all the speakers. They're not all here still, but thank you for your presentations. Torben, do you